getting it oriented. So here we are. Good day to all. So oocyte pickup is a very simple process. There's nothing much to it, but we will be discussing the finer details on what not to do, what to keep in mind so that we have the best results regarding our fragile oocytes. So an oocyte pickup can be done by a gynecologist. It can be done by a radiologist. And as the eggs, each egg is important, each egg counts. So we want to do a least damaging effect because of the so much of pressure and temperature changes. So let's see what is the evidence and how to go about it. Now, the most common way to do a pickup is now the transvaginal ultrasound guided way. And this is how it is. That is, the transvaginal probe is in the vagina, pressed firmly against the vaginal fornix so that the needle goes straight in the ovary without anything coming in between. The other options are, of course, there in certain cases where there is a problem where you cannot approach the ovaries. We'll come to that later. So when we are discussing about ovum pickup, we are discussing our intent is to get the maximum number of eggs, and our intent is to get a good quality of egg. That is, we should not spoil the eggs with temperature changes, pressure changes, pH, and light. So we'll see how all these matter and what we can do so that they are under our control. So the most common is a transvaginal ovum pickup, which we are doing. The other option, sometimes when the ovaries are not within reach, or sometimes because of technical difficulties, the patient is obese, or it could be because she's a case of Mullerian agenesis or a unicornuate uterus where the ovaries are higher up. So then the other option is to do a transabdominal ovum pickup. The transabdominal pickup can be done with a transabdominal ultrasound probe, or more simply by the same transvaginal ultrasound probe. Then, of course, there are a few options. There may be a few cases, an odd case, which you may need to do a laparoscopic ovum pickup. Then again, a laparoscopic pickup, the opio needle, it's the same needle. It can go through a 5 mm trocar, or it could be a direct percutaneous puncture. We haven't ever done a laparoscopic pickup. One case we were forced to do a transabdominal ultrasound, and we did it with a transvaginal probe. So we'll be discussing this later on. Now, in an ovum pickup, though it's a simple process, it's a very simple procedure, but we have to keep in mind the physics and, of course, the evidence. And I'll take you step by step through for the whole process of ovum pickup, and to see what best can be done and what should not be done. This is, of course, what we have. The evidence is always nice to have evidence-based guidelines. And this is ASHRAE 2019, where they have given their recommendations for good practice in ultrasound regarding oocyte pickup. So when we're discussing ovum pickup, it is divided into certain stages. There are things which need to be done before the ovum pickup. Then there are things to be seen regarding the equipment and the consumables, the ovum pickup preparation, the procedure itself, the post-procedure care, and then the associated pathologies and cautions which need to be taken during the pickup, and the complications and risks. So we'll go through all of these one by one. Now, prior to pickup, before the patient goes into the operation theater, we have to have in mind her ultrasound. What was her ultrasound picture? What are we expecting of her ovaries? Are they high up? Are they adherent, or they're in their normal position? Whether it's a unicornuate uterus, because in a unicornuate uterus, usually one ovary is very high, and at times it may not be within reach. Then does the patient have endometriosis or an endometrioma? Because an endometrioma, we have to tell the patient beforehand that there are chances of infection. Whatever we may do, even if we don't touch it, we don't go through it, she has a higher chance of infection. And then in case it's an endometrioma, we have to have a picture that will we be able to approach the ovaries if the endometrioma, is it coming in way or not? Then, and we should be knowing whether she has an hydrosalpinx or not. If there's an hydrosalpinx, and it might come in the way, but nothing is to be done for the hydrosalpinx at the time of ovum pickup. No need to aspirate it. It's not going to help. Vaginal infection has to be screened and taken care of beforehand, because doing the procedure in an infected vagina is going to lead to problems. Consent, of course, has to be taken, and the trigger. The most important part is the patient should walk into the OT at the time you want after the trigger. So each one of us has our own system of assuring that the patient gets a trigger at the right time, and it is cross-checked before the pickup that this is the trigger for this patient was given at this time, and this is the time for her pickup. So these things have to be cross-checked. You have to have your own SOPs and systems to decide who is going to give the trigger, who is going to decide the time when she's going to enter the oocyte retrieval OT. So now in the lab, what needs to be done is everything needs to be incubated. Whatever is going to come in touch with the oocyte has to be incubated at 37 degrees centigrade. Why? Because there is a drop in temperature, a very rapid drop in temperature for the oocyte, which can lead to a spindle damage, and it can lead to a permanent damage. So our aim is that everything that is the media, the round bottom test tubes, these test tubes also have to be opened up and put in the test tube warmer. The test tube warmer also needs to be preheated to 37 degrees. Then there is these mobile nests, which are very good options, and these are single test tube holders. I'll just show you the picture. So these are these test tube warmers, and they need to be put on a few hours, maybe overnight before you start the procedure, and the round bottom test tubes need to be put in the warmer so that they are also calibrated at 37 degrees centigrade. This is another option of a test tube warmer, and one must see that the test tube warmer, the 37 degree, it's going to be up to this level of the test tube. So whenever you're collecting follicular fluid, one should keep it below this level because this is not preheated. This part of the test tube is not calibrated. So when you are doing your pickup, the follicular fluid should be 3/4 full of the test tube. Then these are the mobile nests, which is a very good option. That is, you can, an assistant can hold one of these with a single test tube, and you can stand near the table where the oocyte retrieval is being done, and you can see the fluid. It is transparent. One wall is transparent. So from the time the oocyte is aspirated, it goes through the needle, then it goes directly over here, and this whole system is handed over to it's handed in the embryology lab. So there is no drop in temperature. That is, the follicular fluid remains in 37 degrees till the follicular fluid reaches the embryologist. But even if everything is calibrated at 37 degrees centigrade, then the ovum pickup needle also needs to be preheated in a dry incubator, or you can keep it on the lab guard table. But even if everything is preheated, it has been seen that this is a very nice experiment. And what did it see? That there was a drop of temperature of 7 degrees. That is 30 degrees it was. That they had kept thermocouples at different points. And the maximum drop was from this point to this point. That is, the fall was not in the ovum pickup needle, but it was when it came from the ovum pickup needle to the test tube. So this drop of 7 degrees was there. And if suppose this tube is not calibrated, or the media inside, if you used a gamete buffer to rinse it or to flush it, that is not calibrated, then the drop is going to be further more. Then if this test tube is not kept in a warmed test tube block or in those single test tube holders, again there is going to be a temperature fall. Then the embryology lab should be as near as possible so that the time is minimized for this to reach the embryologist. So even if everything is calibrated and the time is minimized, one has to work fast because there is going to be a drop of temperature. And it has been seen in an experiment that if it drops to 30 degrees and it recovers within 5 minutes, like in 5 minutes, the follicle fluid is checked for the oocytes and is put back into the incubator, then if there is a damage to the spindle, it recovers. But if the temperature goes down to 28 degrees, 26 degrees, and there is a time lag of more than 10 minutes, then there could be a percentage of the spindles which remain damaged and do not recover. So this is the importance of temperature, that everything needs to be preheated and calibrated at 37 degrees and being very fast. Then the room temperature. The room temperature, though the ambient room temperature needs to be 22 to 23 degree, this is because at this temperature, the microbial growth, like if it's going to be warmer, we expect microbes to grow in the environment. But for practical purposes, though the ambient temperature is 22 to 23 degree, but when we are doing the procedure, though this is not mentioned, it just makes sense that when we are doing the procedure at that time or point of time, we make the room a little warmer. Like if the ACs are on, we switch them off. This is just a practical point. Nothing regarding that this needs to be done or doesn't need to be done. So to reduce the distance of the follicular fluid, the embryology lab should be just adjoining so that the time lag is not there. The OT should be clean, sterile. Clean means like you have these available solutions which are like marketed, like Cooks has it, oosafe. These all companies, they have their own which are embryology safe, gamete safe. So we don't need to use, we all know we are not going to use alcohol or 70% alcohol. It's just these solutions which are using, or warm water, soap and warm water in itself is good enough. That is the recommendation, daily cleaning with warm water. Semi-darkness at the time, semi-darkness is because the ultrasound picture is clearer and there is a hypothetical adverse effect on the oocyte. So semi-darkness is the way forward. Anesthesia equipment, though it's a very simple procedure and many people, they must be doing it without anesthesia, just giving cervical block. But you never know patient, they can go into a sudden bronchospasm, a vasovagal. So the equipment must be there for monitoring oxygen, resuscitation, and intubation. We've had one donor patient, a simple donor pickup it was, and that patient landed up into such severe laryngospasm that we really had a tough time, though our hospital is equipped with all cardiology services. So there was a laryngospasm, there was a coronary spasm, though she was worked up, everything. So the patient came out of it, but what I mean to say is you can have an odd patient who has a problem. So your resuscitation equipment should be there for the patient, for any odd patient who goes into problem. So this is our lab and this is our Boyle's apparatus, which you can see, and this is the embryology lab. So we have a pass window over here. So there's an assistant. We have two assistants. One assistant helps me with who holds the single test tube for the follicular fluid. And then there's another assistant who just passes that test tube to the embryology in this pass window. The ultrasound system which we need, it should be fit for ovum pickup, meaning that it's a transvaginal probe with this frequency. And there should be a transabdominal probe also available. And the machine should have the ability to adjust the field of view, the depth and zooming options. Color and power Doppler capabilities should be there because at times when you are doubtful, you just switch on the color and it becomes simpler to know where the vessel is and where the follicles are. Then it should display the needle guide superimposed on the field of view because of the needle guide. Sometimes the needle, though you really don't need a needle guide in this case because the needle is very clearly visible. But at times the track of the needle is not visible, and then if you display the needle guide, then you can make out where the needle is going. An appropriate protocol for transducer disinfection should be established. Now, this is what is mentioned in ASHRAE 2019. This is like not defined. It is just left to how you are going to do it. An appropriate protocol for transducer infection should be established in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Now, if you go to the manufacturer's instructions and if you see the guidelines, there is a lot of disinfection that needs to be done from one patient to another patient. But specifically because in oocyte retrieval, we don't want to use any disinfectant agents on it. So the best way, what we have been following, I won't say that's a standard procedure. We can discuss this, how you are disinfecting your probe. But first, we'll see what do the guidelines say. We need to put a sterile probe cover incorporating a good quality sonographic gel on the tip of the transducer. A latex-free cover should be used in case of latex allergy. The use of lubrication on the outside of the cover does not offer any improvement for the quality of the image and should be avoided, as there is a hypothetical gametotoxic and embryotoxic effect. So outside, we don't need to put the gel. Inside, they say you can put the gel inside, and when needed, sterile water or culture media can act as a lubricant and conductor of ultrasound waves. Now, what we are doing is we have these sterile gloves, and we put in the NS, which is an NS bottle which we have, and we just fill it up. One of the fingers is filled up with the fluid, and the probe goes into. So the fluid inside removes the air, and there is no lubricant outside. We don't put any lubricant inside because there could be a perforation. It has been seen that around 10 to 20% perforations do occur. Then because of the gel could lead to smear infection, or it could be gametotoxic. So this is what we do. There are otherwise sterile cover which goes up to the hole of the probe wire also. But this is what we are doing. And over that, we fix up the probe, the guide. So this is how it is. We have these disposable ones, but we we keep them in our ETO machine. And so we have around 10 of them. So it works well. But you can have the metallic ones also, which are autoclavable. So each probe has their specific needle guide, and they come with it. They come in, they're pretty expensive. It's like they're something around 30,000 for 5 they are. But they can be used in the ETO machine. Otherwise, these also are available, the metallic ones, and in between the metallic ones are autoclavable. Now, regarding the ovum pickup needle. So this is to tell you what we should know, like when we have this coding written, what does this code mean? So we have a single lumen ovum aspiration needle. Now, 17 gauge is the thickness. 17 or 18 gauge is the most commonly used needle. We use a 17 gauge needle. Then the 35 number is the length of the needle. That is, I'm just specifying about the Cook's needle. All the needles are standardized. It's more or less the same. So this is the length of the needle, which is 35 centimeters. So when you have a 1735, 17 is the gauge, 35 is the length. The other option is a 30 centimeter needle also, which is available. So you have to see with which you're more comfortable. It is just that the longer the needle, the longer will be the travel path of the follicular fluid and the oocytes, and it'll just, you're wasting 5 centimeters more of travel time of the follicular fluid, leading to a drop of temperature. So maybe longer needles you need for obese patients, and you can cut down and you can use the 30 centimeter needle. So that's for you to decide. Then 60. What is 60? 60 is the vacuum line that is over here, 60 centimeter, which we have over here. We'll just go to it 1 second. It's an aspiration line, sorry. So this needle has an aspiration line with over a silicone bung, which this gets attached to the round test tube where the fluid is going to come. Follicular fluid is going to be there. So now over here, there are 2 options. As you can see, this can be 60 centimeter or 90 centimeter. If it's 90 centimeter, that is the whole system can go a little away. Suppose you do not have a single test tube holder and you want to keep these test tube, round bottom test tubes on a table where there is the test tube warmer is kept. That is the whole heating block which needs to be kept on a table. Then maybe you may be needing a longer length of the aspiration line. But if you have those single test tube holders, then 60 centimeters is good enough. And this distance is important because this is the distance through which the follicular fluid is going to go into the round bottom test tube. So let's cut as much as possible. We can cut on. We can cut off on this length of 5 centimeter. We can cut off on this length of 30 centimeter. So whenever you're ordering your ovum pickup needle, just see where you can cut off the length. So that is the minimum distance for the follicular fluid to travel. Then this is the vacuum line. This is a standard line. This has to be connected through another, we use a perfusion pump pressure line. It has to be connected to that to go to the aspiration pump. Connecting it directly to the aspiration pump, it just limits everything in the theater. So we need another line which is available, which can be added to it, and that connects through this. There is a filter in it, and that goes to the aspiration pump. So for the needle, then the last thing that is an A bevel. That is, you can see B. This is a B bevel or an A bevel needle. The A bevel needle is a sharper needle. This is an A bevel needle. That is, it's more acute. It's for smaller, like it's for IVM or very small follicles. And B bevel is a more slanting, and it is a broader needle. It has a bigger bevel. So normally we are using so we have a B bevel needle with the length of the needle being around 30 or 35 centimeter. With the length of the aspiration line, you have to decide you want a 60 centimeter or 90 centimeter. So these are the variables in the needle which need to be seen. Then this is an aspiration pump. They're available in different types. You can have, this is how it shows. The pressure which we use and which is recommended is something between 100 to 200 mm of mercury. This is another analog one which is more controlled digitally. So now what should be the pressure be? Now this is ASHRAE 2019. This is exact copy of what is written over there. The suction pump creates a negative pressure for aspirating follicles. At present, there is no conclusion on the optimal aspiration level, and a variety of pressures between 100 and 200 are used. The suction pump should be validated prior to use, and a spare suction pump should be available in case one does not work. Now, what do we mean by validating a suction pump? Like, we can validate the thermometers, we can validate the pressures, we can validate the CO2 levels, but how do we validate the suction pump? So we'll be talking about that in another 2 or 3 slides. The pressure should be maintained stable during the procedure, as changes can induce turbulence. Changes in pressure can be acceptable in cases of needle block. Now, this is something which I had also learned during the process when we started with these classes, when going through literature. This is something very interesting. When we talk of pressure, like, what is our target? Our target is to optimally aspirate an oocyte. Now, the aspiration setup might have an impact on the oocyte recovery rate. Like, if it's too less a pressure, maybe the M2 oocyte does not get dislodged from the cumulus. And if we use too much of pressure, it could lead to damage. They have been seen that very high pressures can lead to breaking of the zona. So we need an optimum pressure, which would lead to aspiration of the oocytes and with least damage to the zona. So what is that? So this will depend on the pressure and the flow rate, through the speed with which the follicular fluid is flowing, that is the flow rate. Now, this will further depend on the thickness of the needle, the length of the needle, the connecting tube, which I said that is the length which with the aspiration line that was 60 centimeter, and then the suction pressure. So all of these things combined will affect the total force which is acting on the oocytes at the time of aspiration. Now, it has been seen in this study, this was like long back in 1996, then again in 2014, that what is the optimal flow rate? Like, what is the speed with which we should aspirate follicular fluid? So the optimal flow rate which has been calculated is 0.5 ml per second, which comes out to something around 12 ml in 30 seconds. So this is the optimal flow rate. how do we get this optimal flow rate? We saw in our own lab when we aspirated fluid, keeping a 17 gauge needle, a 30 centimeter length of the needle with a 60 centimeter aspiration line. And if we kept the pressure pump at 100 mm of mercury, the flow rate was 10 to 12 ml per 30 second, which is what is required. So if you go back to your lab and you see yourself that when you use the, like whatever you are using, what is the flow rate that is coming out, and you try to adjust it to 10 to 12 ml per 30 seconds. How can you adjust it? By changing the suction pressure. So now, like we don't, so this is the way now we validate our suction pump after like 2 months or so. We check whether when we keep it at 100, if the flow rate is coming at 10 to 12, that means the pressure is 100 mm of mercury. So these are the variables you use and you get a flow rate of 10 to 12 ml per 30 seconds. Suppose you use a needle which is smaller in diameter, then of course you will have to increase the pressure to have the same flow rate. If you use a double lumen needle for flushing, which has a smaller diameter, then again you will need to increase this pressure to have the same flow rate so that you have an optimum oocyte recovery. So this is how it goes. Smaller the needle, you'll have to increase the pressure. Longer the needle, again, you'll have to increase the pressure. If the length of the tubing is longer, again, you'll have to increase the pressure. And for a double lumen needle for follicular flushing, again, you'll have to increase the pressure from 100 mm of mercury, which I just mentioned. Now, this is specifically mentioned only with Kitazato. Nowhere else are the pressures mentioned. So as you can see, in a 17 gauge needle, the aspiration pressure, which they suggest is something 125 plus minus 25, that is 100 to 150. And when you use a 17 gauge double lumen needle, you can see that the pressures recommended are 50 mm mercury, more than what is for a single lumen. So that's how the physics is. Now, the persons, we should minimize the persons in the OT because each person needs to so much of VOCs. The minimum is an anesthetist and an assistant for the anesthetist, a gynecologist or an ultrasonologist who's going to do the procedure, an assistant holding the test tube when the follicle is being aspirated, and we also have an assistant transferring the test tube to the embryology lab. So it goes very smoothly and uninterruptedly. For the patient, she needs to change her clothes, OT clothes, she needs to empty her bladder definitely before entering the lab, IV in the OT, an IV line needs to be secured. We give prophylactic antibiotics for all our patients. Prophylactic antibiotics definitely for patients who have endometriomas, endometriosis, PID, a cyst, follicular cyst, dermoids. Semi-lithotomy position and buttocks at the edge of right at the edge of the table so that the transvaginal probe can be moved easily. So the position is made, we need to clean the vagina or cervix. There is no need to use disinfectant, though literature says you can use betadine. Maybe some do and then flush it off with warm saline, but we've been into this in IVF for in 12 years. We simply use warm saline and it makes it, we've not had any case of infection. Warm normal saline, but we use copious amount, maybe 1 bottle or 1.5 bottle of it, that is around 500 ml with pressure so that all that cheesy material or the vaginal secretions in the crevices are flushed out and you are left with a nice normal pink vagina after with this copious irrigation. Anesthesia, we give anesthesia, a short GA with propofol. Antibiotic prophylaxis, as I said, we use for all our patients. The trolley is very simple, a sim speculum, sponge holder, anterior vaginal wall retractor. This is the needle guide, few sterile pieces of gauzes, and these are our simple gloves, sterile gloves for for the procedure and for covering the probe. So do a per-speculum examination, clean the vagina with warm saline, and have the probe with the needle guide ready. And most importantly, see that the needle guide fits. There has to be a click for the probe and the needle guide. Before the OPU checklist, it is important that before you start the actual procedure, that is, once you've cleaned up everything and your transvaginal probe is in place with the needle guide, then you must check by doing some aspiration, null aspiration, to see that there is no crack. At times, the round test tube could be cracked, the needle could be blocked, just to be sure that everything is working before going into the follicle. And make sure that the suction, you check the suction pump, you check the pressure, whatever pressure you have in mind. We keep our pressures at 100 mm. And we see that everything is placed, and we tell the anesthetists to keep on looking at the suction pressure pump in between so that the pressure does not fluctuate. Ensure that the needle guide is appropriately placed on the ultrasound probe with no gaps. The process, the procedure: firmly apply the probe against the vaginal wall. Then don't start the procedure. See by the ultrasound picture of the whole pelvis. Most importantly, see how the ovaries are, see the iliac vessels, identify them before you start the process. And most importantly, you must see for any free fluid, because at the end of the procedure, suppose there is bleeding or anything, you should be knowing that this free fluid was already there before we started the procedure. So these 2 points are very important, that you just go through the whole picture of the pelvis, see the right ovary, see the left ovary, see the iliac vessels, and then see if you need free fluid. See how the endometrium is looking, just to have an idea. Now, this is the ovary over here, and then this is the follicle over here, which you can see. This was outside the ovarian cortex, but it looks like a follicle. But when you have doubt, then rotate your probe to right angles. And when we rotated it to right angles, it becomes longitudinal, and it turned into the iliac vessels. So when you have somewhere this on the lateral outermost part, be sure that this is not a iliac vessel. You can just change the direction of the probe, and this is what it was. Or what else you can do is just switch on the color, and in the same plane you will know that this is an iliac vessel. So these are 2 ways to know how to, especially for the follicles, the outermost follicles. Be careful, though grossly you can make out whether they are in the cortex, but if you have any doubt, just change the direction of the probe, rotate it to 90 degrees, and you'll come to know. Now the process: keep the needle inside the needle guide, prick the vaginal wall firmly, and then you're going to prick the ovarian cortex and the follicle. So before pricking the follicle, turn on the negative pressure. Why? Because the follicle is so distended with fluid, and if you do not turn on the negative pressure, then there is going to be outflow of fluid in the pelvis, which may contain an oocyte, and you may lose it. So before pricking a follicle, switch on the negative pressure and then go into a follicle. Keep the needle in the center of the follicle. Aspirate till the last drop which you see on the ultrasound screen, because it's the last drop mostly where you're going to get your oocytes. So aspirate till the whole follicle collapses. Don't be in a hurry to leave the follicle. And before nearing the end, rotate the needle 2 to 3 times. It's just like a curating, just like a little shuffling inside the follicle gently, so that maybe if the oocyte is not getting separated from the cumulus, it will. So it's just a little help. Then after that, this is just to show you the picture how it is. So these are the follicles in line. So you come from the outermost. It hasn't pricked yet, so we'll prick it again. And now the fluid is going. You can see that the fluid is going, and we're rotating it. Then go to the next follicle. If you are going in the same line, then you just keep the negative pressure on. Don't switch it off. That is, from one follicle to other, the negative pressure remains on till the last follicle you have in the same straight line. So you can see the collapsing follicle, then rotation of the needle till you see no fluid. Then when you're going to withdraw this, at that point of time, switch off the negative pressure before leaving the follicle, because if the negative pressure is on, then this follicle is going to be thrown down towards the collecting tube, and it could lead to a damage, like it's called the cappuccino effect. So the negative pressure has to be started once you start pricking, once you enter the follicle. Keep the negative pressure on if you're going from one follicle to another till whatever your line is done. Then once you're going to withdraw this and then change your line, switch off the negative pressure. And once you're going to move to another line of follicles and switch on the negative pressure. So this is the basic science of it. This is another video. Over here, the needle guide is on. So you can see, though there is no need, but it is in the direction of the needle guide. So it's being aspirated till the end. Then go to the next follicle. So it's the same process. There's nothing in it. Nothing much, but you have to be steady. And when you're inside the follicle, see that your movement of your hand are not too lateral, because the needle is going to tear the ovarian cortex. So once you're inside the ovary, your hand movements should be minimal. That is, they just should go from here to here, or just maybe you change a little bit of direction. But see that your hand movements are minimal, because it's going to lead to a tear inside the ovary. Once you withdraw the needle and you're outside, then you can have your lateral hand movements. But minimize your movements. Minimize the pricks to the ovary. That is, in one prick, once you enter the ovary and you go into a plane, try to have a minimum pricks in the ovary. The needle should be gently withdrawn without negative suction pressure to avoid sudden forward flow of follicular fluid towards the collection tube. If you're going to prick another follicle, then keep the negative pressure on. The movement of the hand holding the transducer should be minimal when the needle is in the ovary. Lateral movements are a big no, because they can, as I said, tearing, bleeding, and pain. And must be careful with the follicles next to the iliac vessels. Once the procedure is over, check by ultrasound for the pelvic picture, see if there's any free fluid, any increase or rapidly increasing free fluid, and then the procedure is over. When you clean up the vagina per speculum examination, usually at times you have some bleeding points in the cervix or the vagina, and you just press them, clean it up, press it with a gauze, press it for a few minutes, and usually it's done with. At times, occasionally, you may need to give a stitch with a 1-0 catgut, so that should be available in the OT. But usually it is not required, just an odd case which may need it. And before shifting the patient, see for her vitals and then shift the patient. The patient should be in the recovery room, monitor the patient for 2 to 3 hours. You should not be in a hurry to send the patient. Before leaving, be sure that she's comfortable, be sure that she has passed urine, there is no pain or tachycardia. But if she has a problem, sometimes the patient has nausea, she has pain, tachycardia, must do an ultrasound before sending her home to see for any collection in the pelvis. Then be in touch with the patients for pain or fever, especially in cases of endometriomas. They lead to havoc in the pelvis. People who had TO abscesses, very bad. So this must be clarified before doing the procedure, that even if you are perfect in your procedure and you've given her antibiotics, still the patient can have infection, and the patient should know of this. So after the pickup checklist, monitor the general status, be alert for complications, and provide patients with written information and a 24 hours emergency number. Now, troubleshooting. Where all do we get stuck up in at the time of ovum pickup? Well, if you aspirate blood, suppose you have gone into a follicle which is hemorrhagic, or then change the tube and because don't aspirate further follicular fluid in a test tube which has blood, because it will spoil the next oocyte, which would be healthy otherwise. If the pressure is not building up, the tube may be cracked. If the needle gets blocked, press the red button, pressure boost or retrograde flushing with a syringe. Try avoid pricking an endometrioma. Don't have this in mind that you're going to aspirate it. If by chance you prick an endometrioma, just stop it and change the test tube and flush your needle with flushing media so that it's all cleared of that chocolate fluid. Try to avoid going through the myometrium. If ovaries are too high, pressure on the abdomen or table, it may make them approachable by changing the position of the patient, changing the inclination of the table. Sometimes you can't see the needle tip. See if you put on the needle image guide to see. If you still can't see the needle tip, just move it a little bit, withdraw and reinsert, and then you may be able to see it. If you still can't see it, take it out. See if the tip is not broken also. Be very sure about that. And then reinsert it. If ovaries are not within reach, this could be unexpectedly because of adhesions or a patient is too obese. And in cases of high ovaries, which we are expecting in cases of an ectopic ovary in abdomen with a unicornuate uterus, so be careful when you're doing an ovum pickup in unicornuate uterus patients. Then patients with Mullerian vaginal agenesis, Mullerian agenesis, their ovaries are too high. Sometimes the vagina is so small you cannot reach the ovaries transvaginally, and you need electively to plan a transabdominal ultrasound. Fertility preservation in young patients with cancer, again, we have to approach by the transabdominal route. Now, the transabdominal route is not simple as it looks. We had to do it for a patient, so it is simpler to do it with a TVS probe than a transabdominal probe and the bladder needs to be empty. With the transvaginal probe, you can press the tip firmly to be nearer to the ovary. Use the same needle, but you need multiple pricks. Like while doing a transvaginal pickup with the same prick, you can aspirate, like in one prick, you can aspirate 1/3 of the ovary, but in a transabdominal route with a transvaginal probe, you can just go in one line because the abdominal wall is so stiff, and then you have to withdraw and then again puncture. So multiple punctures are required. One is that you have to clean the abdomen very thoroughly with betadine and then with copious saline, because the skin is an area of microbes. So this is how it is. You may use a transabdominal probe, but it is more difficult. You will need a biopsy guide on the transabdominal probe. The bladder needs to be filled, and at times there is trauma to bladder and hematuria. So for a transabdominal pickup, the TVS probe is what is recommended, and one sees that you have to go through a layer of fat before reaching the oocyte, and this fat limits the whole mobility of the procedure. Now, if the suction pressure doesn't build up, as you check for blockage, you check, this is like when you're doing a null aspiration, or in between, if it doesn't, there could be a blockage. The test tube wall may be broken, the test tube, the cap may be broken. You just have to see, you do a retrograde flush, or you can do the boost pressure button. There's a red button, and which suddenly increases the pressure. So to check for it, and sometimes there's a clot in between, and then that gets cleared up. Then what to do if the suction pump doesn't work, like it just stopped working? One thing is to have a standby pump. That is the best option. Or you have a friend who will give you a suction pump, a friend's pump or a standby pump. Other than that, what can you do? So this is a very simple, like it would be saying a life-saving procedure for the oocyte if you don't have an extra pump. So what you do is you clamp the vacuum line with an artery. The vacuum line is the one which is going to the pump, and use a 20 ml syringe. Pull the syringe completely to create the negative pressure. Then release the artery and the follicular fluid is aspirated. So this is we just checked it out to see how it works and what is the flow rate of fluid that comes. So what we saw is, this is the ovum over here. So this is the negative pressure. Then we will release the artery. Then there is a sudden gush of this. Suppose the needle was in the oocyte. So then there is this sudden gush of fluid, and you can see the speed was such that 12 ml of the fluid was filled up in 10 seconds. So the flow, it's a very fast, the fluid comes much faster than the flow rate which we have set in a suction pump. What we want is something around 0.5 ml per second. But if you do it by this procedure, the flow rate is faster. It's around 2 times higher, faster than what you get. But at least it's life-saving, though the flow rate may be a little damaging to the oocyte, but at least it works well. So you keep on putting the needle, clamp the vacuum line with the artery, take a 20 ml syringe, aspirate, then release the ovary, and then the follicular fluid will come. So this is the way to go about it if nothing works. Or theoretically, you can use your standard pressure pump which you have in the OT and adjust the pressure to something around 100 to 200. So that should also work as an emergency. So then, if the uterus comes in way, try to adjust and change the direction of the needle. Or you can put a pressure on the ovary to see what works. If it doesn't work and you have to go through the myometrium, try to avoid myometrium. If it's a fresh transfer, then it may be avoided if you're going through the endometrium. As I said, what happens if the OPO needle is not visible, withdraw, reinsert, move, make a little movement in it, check the fit. And what happens? Yes, the needle guide there is does not, it gets dislodged a little bit and then you cannot see the needle. So you must check the fit of the needle guide, and there should be a click if you're using those disposable ones, because they become loose after some time. And then when you withdraw needle, see if the needle tip is not broken, because the tip is the echogenic part which you see. Now flushing, just a few slides about flushing. Do we need to do it? It sounds good. It's like you keep on flushing till you get a few oocytes. So this is how the oocyte is, and this is the follicular fluid which we see. And once you move your needle a little bit, or a ripe oocytes, they are just loosely attached, or they're already free in this complex, and then you aspirate them. So why is it that we need to use extra pressure or we need to flush a follicle? It could be because the oocyte is not of a good quality. It is not ripe. If it was ripe, it would have like broken off by itself, or it would have been lying loosely. So is it really worth it to flush and to get an immature oocyte? So let's see what's the physics of flushing first. Now in flushing, you cannot use a single lumen needle. If you're going to aspirate and flush and push in fluid, then the oocyte is going to be moving up in and out in the same needle. So it'll be just going to and fro. So these are special needles, double lumen needles. The outer needle lumen is for the fluid which we put in for flushing, and the inner lumen is for aspiration. Now the inner lumen needle is thinner. So that's what we said, that for a double lumen needle, you have to use extra pressure to get the same flow rate. So whatever pressure, suppose you're using 100, you might need to use 130 or 140 for the same size of the lumen gauge needle. So this is just a review that if you're using 17 gauge, and the pressure, if it's 125 here, you need to increase it by around 50 points, something between 25 to 50 points. to get the same pressure. Otherwise, the whole process, if you're going, less pressure is going to act, it's not going to work. Now, a double lumen needle. So there are two lumens, the outer lumen over here, this is the extra line which is attached to it. So here you push in the culture media. This culture media goes from the outer lumen into the follicle and it flushes, and then you aspirate. So you keep on flushing, maybe 3 times, 4 times, whatever the protocol is, or till you have an open flush. That is, you keep on flushing till the embryologist says, yes, I got the oocyte. But there is a limit. Those studies which are showing flushing, 90% of the oocyte, if it has to come, it comes after the third or the fourth flush. After that, it's not really going to help. If you're going to get a follicle after, say, 5 flushes, it may not be a good follicle. It may be a damaged follicle. The time taken so much. So it doesn't really help. So now what are the disadvantages of flushing? One is that we are putting in fluid over here. There is extra fluid, that is, you cannot keep it at 37 degrees. It's going to go through this whole system, this needle, and it's going to go into the follicle. So with what pressure it's going, with what speed it's going, with what temperature it's going, we don't know. We can't keep it under our control, and it could do more damage to the oocyte, which is already there in the follicle, than what would have been aspirated with all these things not done. So it increases the time taken, it increases the time of the oocyte outside, it increases the exposure of the oocyte follicle to more pressure changes, more temperature changes, prolonged time. So what is the media for per flush? It has been seen that something around 3 ml. What is the force speed? We don't know how many times to flush. 3 to 4 is the most adequate, or till an oocyte is obtained. So does flushing improve results? Do we mean good results by the number of oocytes? Do we mean good results by the quality of the oocytes? Or do we mean good results by the pregnancy rates? It is time consuming. It is not recommended for normal or hyper responders. It may be if there are just maybe a few, maybe 2 to 5 follicles, or maybe for a single follicle, when you have a single follicle and you do a single lumen flush, single lumen aspirate, and you're scared that maybe we won't get it, and then you lose your chance. So at the outset only you start with a flush. We have no evidence for where it works best. The downside is, as I said, the exposure of the oocyte, more time outside, more pressure changes. The pressure of the injecting flush media may be damaging. There is a greater temperature drop. The oocyte may be pushed back in the ovary. It leads to soft tissue trauma. Now, this is Evidence 2025 systematic review and meta-analysis. This is October 25, a recently published one. It's an analysis of RCTs comparing follicular flushing versus aspiration during oocyte retrieval. What is the conclusion? Follicular flushing during oocyte retrieval did not improve the number of retrieved oocytes, the number of M2 oocytes, the implantation rate, the fertilization rate, the clinical pregnancy rate, nothing. Ongoing pregnancy rate, live birth, nothing. Nothing has been, and it was associated with a significant prolongation of the procedure, but cycle cancellation was improved with follicular flushing in women with a poor ovarian response. That means if you are not going to get an oocyte with a single lumen needle, there are high chances that you'll get it with a double lumen needle, but the oocytes which come with a double lumen needle may not be the best of the oocytes which are there. So does obtaining more oocytes by flushing means better pregnancy rates? We don't know. So maybe for monofollicular, maybe not. We don't do a flush for any, we haven't done it for any of our patients, but it'd be nice to know how you are managing it and what's your experience with it. Other options is, this is what we do. We slightly increase the pressure by the pressure which we usually, if we're using 100, we increase it by a few mm of mercury just to be sure that the pressure is more and the oocyte comes. Complications. Most important is to see the ultrasound picture of pelvis before the start of the procedure and after the pickup for any new fluid collection. You must examine the patient before letting her go home regarding her vitals, regarding her pain, regarding her nausea status. Repeat ultrasound before sending the patient home if you have any doubts. And be careful with patients who have endometriosis and hydrosalpinx. Call them earlier after 3 to 5 days to see if they're okay. Now, ovum pickup is on the whole a very safe procedure. Overall incidence of complications are 0.4%. This is from the ASHRAE data. It could be related to sedation. Then little vaginal bleeding, we have seen it so often. Little vaginal bleeding. We had a little bleeding intra-abdominal. That was also in a donor patient, so it becomes more worrisome when it's in a donor patient. There was a little collection in the pelvis. We kept the patient for 2 hours. It did not increase her CBC. Her vitals was okay. And she was, of course, not ready to stay because she was a donor. She had to go. So as there was no increase in the collection, but we called her back the next day to see and everything went okay. So you have to be mindful of the problems. Injury to pelvic structures, pelvic abscess, ovarian abscess, especially for TO masses, especially for endometriosis, be very, very careful. Pelvic infection, so don't get into the temptation of aspirating an endometrioma. OHSS, yes, of course, that is there but now because of the all free cycles, OHSS is hardly there. So that was, I would say, safe oocyte retrieval. So thank you so much. And now it'll be nice to know your viewpoints upon a simple procedure which we are all doing. And just let's have your take on it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for that very conceptualizing lecture. Actually, you tried to conceptualize many areas which we don't understand in routine practice. So the house is open for discussion. Anybody can unmute or put their questions in the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer. How often do you calibrate your aspiration pump?
We've done it, like I said, once in 2 months, once in 2 months or 3 months, not earlier than that. So
any warning signs that now you need to calibrate, or any how do you come to know that you need to calibrate, or it's a routine practice?
it's just that like the whole lab needs to be calibrated after some time. So this is after reading all this about this follicular aspiration fluid levels, the follicular fluid rate. Only we after that we started calibrating. Otherwise, there is no way to calibrate a pressure pump. So after going through literature while preparing these lectures, only I think so I became more wiser. And so when we did it, so it was like, oh yes, what's mentioned in literature is what's happening in the lab. So we've calibrated it like the whole lab after 2 months or so. Warning signs would be, yes, suppose we are not getting enough of oocytes, the oocyte number which we are expecting, we are seeing, and we are not seeing it. That would be one pointer, a green signal that you must calibrate to see that the pressures are okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the embryologists say that the oocytes which are coming, they are damaged, that means the pressure is going too high. Like suddenly, if these are the changes, if there's something less oocytes coming or the oocytes are being more damaged, then one needs to go back again and see what you're doing.
Right.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Igwelu. Hello, nice to see you.
Yes. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for a beautiful lecture. I just want to ask, the embryologist will always report blood in inner catheter or blood in outer catheter. Can you tell me the effect on fertilization? And then the pressure you're talking about, I have an automated machine. If you don't get up to 300, you will not deflate the follicle. So I need your comment on these 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Sarapit, you'll tell us about the effect of blood on the fertilization rates.
On the embryo transfer catheter?
No, she said on the fertilization rates. So it would be blood coming along the follicular fluid.
Oh, it always does. Actually, only the initial few aspirations are straw colored. That is how the follicular fluid looks like it's straw colored, but after a few tubes or maybe a couple of tubes, it's always blood stained. The arteries rupture and the follicular fluid is always and always blood stained. So it has no effect practically until unless
I
the
meant, I
until
meant on ET catheter, endometrial transfer catheter,
okay.
inner and outer sheets.
So again, Dr. Monica and we did a study on one of our fellows. We did a study on the effect of blood and mucus on outer and inner cannulas, and we found that if the blood was found on inner cannula, and especially if because if there is blood and there is a retained embryo, the embryo gets damaged. If it is lying in the blood for a little long, the embryo gets damaged. So at that point, the results can get affected. But if the blood is in the outer cannula and the inner cannula is clear, there is practically no effect of on pregnancy rates.
Madam, I want to ask this regarding the pressure application. So when you are penetrating the vaginal wall, then penetrating the follicle, when to start give pressure, keeping pedal on, off like this. So
We start the pressure when we are going to prick the follicle. Not
okay,
the vaginal wall, not the ovary, but like when we know that the needle is going to get into the follicle. So like that, the first follicle, which is next to the ovary only. So maybe at that point, you just keep it on and then keep it on for all the follicles in the same line.
Okay. Then we are changing the plane of movement of
Yes.
probe. That time only, again, you have to stop the pressure, then
Yes.
you have to give pressure.
Yes,
Or
then
you
the
have to keep, somebody say you're supposed to keep always in when it is in the inside the ovary. What exactly we supposed to keep the pressure?
See, it is like if you inside the ovary, when you are in the same, like you have 4 or 5 follicles in the same line, so you keep the negative pressure on. Then when you are going to change your line movement, you're going to go into a different line. So that means you have withdrawn, the needle is not aspirating any follicle. So at that time of point, just switch it off and then put it when you're going to prick a new set of follicles. So like
Then-
basically when you're pricking the follicles, keep it on. When you're not pricking the follicles or when you're withdrawing from one set of follicles, then switch it off.
When you are withdrawing the needle, supposed to keep where the needle, we supposed to withdraw fully or keep it in the at the level of capsule and we have to rotate the next plane of the needle movement.
Then it is better. It depends on if you can, like, without too much of lateral movement or too much of angulation. If there's another set of follicles which can be managed, then you just keep it in the ovary and then just change a little bit of the angle of the probe and the needle will go. Then there are few follicles which are going to be lying here and there. For that, at times you have to take out it from the ovary and give a separate prick and then go into it. At times, even from the vagina, you may need to change the position. So the first few pricks, they go in the ovary, and then later the follicles which are left outside or an odd position, then the needle needs to be changed. The position needs to be changed from maybe a new ovary prick needs to be given also at times.
Is there a number of follicle prick it will cause ovarian bleeds, or is there how to minimize the prick in the ovarian capsule we are giving the prick?
Yes, so you like when you see it, you just plan that okay, these are the follicles. So you try to go from the follicles which are nearest to the needle when you enter, and you just try to go. Then maybe on the plane when you're moving, you just see like it's just planning. That if there are few follicles, those who are once you reach the outer the lateral part of the ovary, then 2-3 follicles which are lying next to it, just change a little bit of the direction so that everything goes in the same prick. So you have to minimize it, but you just can't fight the angle of the probe. So as much as you can go and then just take it out and it goes all fine. Like you don't really have to count the number of pricks. As it goes smoothly, you can do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Igulu was asking something about the pressure. Could you please?
Yes, I use pressure of 300 because below 300, the follicle will not collapse.
Oh, no. 300. Okay. But have you tried earlier lesser pressures?
What
Yes, we
gauge,
tried lesser
what gauge
pressures
she's
with
using?
nothing happened, blood everywhere. When we increased to 300, then a straw colored fluid came and then it was okay. I know it's big, but it's high, but there's nothing I can do.
Nothing at times, yeah, nothing can be done. These are exceptions. So then I
Thank
just
you.
wanted to add for the blood in the inner catheter. At times, when we know it's a difficult embryo transfer, so like the inner catheter has been twisted or rotated, angulated at the internal os. So having blood with a difficult transfer is more detrimental than having blood in the inner catheter, which is a smooth embryo transfer. Because at times the cervix is so friable that you just touch the cervix, so you go into the endocervical canal, there is blood which can enter the inner catheter. So pregnancies do occur, as Dr. Sarpreet has said, but if it's a difficult transfer with blood, that's a different story.
And if you're anticipating blood, if there is a blood at the cervix, there's an
Yes.
erosion, or you're anticipating a difficult transfer with some bleeding, then you can use there's a catheter by the name of Guardia Pro catheter. It is like a double lumen needle, and the blood actually goes in between the two lumens on the outer side, and the inner lumen remains smooth and clear. So it's available from Cook. So you can try using that catheter.
That's a nice
Thank
option.
you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you.
Sir, can you repeat the catheter name, sir?
It's Guardia Pro, Cook Guardia Pro.
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
sure there are many other companies who are making similar ones, so you can check it out.
So there's a question regarding the clot from the needle, ovum pickup needle. So if there's a clot, one thing is you can increase the pressure. And so with that pressure, you take some flushing media, dip your needle into that and increase the pressure. If it still doesn't work, the clot is stuck, then from the needle end, from the aspiration end, take a 10 ml syringe and flush it with air, and the clot usually gets dislodged. So these two things are there to help it out.
So we have got many students who have already, part of the group. I can see their names, many of them in the group now, and we invite the rest of the people also to join if the registrations are still open, and I've sent the link of the registration in the chat box. So, or you can visit the fertilisacademy.com and go to the upcoming courses section. In that, you'll find precision ovarian stimulation. You can register. Dr. Ruchita is asking if ovary is high up and adhere to the uterus, how to do pickup.
One is you try to change the tilt of the table, or try to push, some assistant tries to push the ovary from above. But if it doesn't work out, then you have to do a trans-abdominal ultrasound pickup with a TVS probe. So that is simpler. It's the same process. The ultrasound picture is the same. The needle is the same. The pressures are the same, maybe a little higher pressure. The only thing is that whatever follicles are there in one plane of the needle is what you can do. You cannot really shift the needle to another plane. You have to take out the needle, and there are multiple pricks on the abdomen when you are doing a trans-abdominal. And we were stuck once we did it. It was not simple because of the thickness of the abdominal wall. You get a lesser number of oocytes. The oocytes are more damaged also somehow, but that's the only way out.
And there's another question: bent needle because of hard tissue. How to proceed? Use same needle or change the needle?
No, we'll have to change the needle because the bent is going to damage the flow of the oocyte going through an angulated needle. So one has to change it. Hard tissue would be the uterus or the myometrium, which is coming in between, or the cervical canal. So try to not go through that path again.
Dr. Ruchita, you want to ask some question?
Anybody doing flushing for poor responders or for any patient? Dr. Sarpreet, you've seen, what's your experience with flushing?
Ma'am, not much gain, but people who have been who have learned on flushing double lumen needles, they still use flushing, irrespective of the scientific evidence against it. Because, it not only doesn't improve anything, it also is harmful at times. Because if you're pushing in cold media, it can lead to aneuploidies because of changes in the temperature. And somebody using a 90 centimeter double lumen and pushing in cold media at whatever pressure, because pressure is also not controlled. So when you push, it can mechanically damage the oocyte and the follicle, and then when the oocyte flows through the channel, it is exposed to cold. It's air conditioned suite, the OT. Plus, the media is not optimally maintained at 37 during the transit and the exit both. So I think it's not a good idea.
Then how many flushes what's the process? Those who do it, how do they go about it? How many flushes? Like,
It all depends actually, how
Okay.
many oocytes you're targeting, and if you're placed well, then you will not flush that much. If you're not placed well, so you will like to flush again and again.
So we have a question from Dr. Sandy. Accidental prick into the artery. Immediately withdraw, and usually nothing. It just seals up by itself, but you have to observe. If there's going to be a hematoma, it's going to be so rapid, then you'll have to shift the patient to the OT if there is but otherwise, if there's no collection, just give them tranexamic acid and just observe and see. Nothing else can be done conservatively, but you have to have your eyes on that point and give us some tranexamic acid. It might help. For any hematoma, anywhere there is a prick or a bleeding problem, one just has to observe at times because of a little blood collection. It just seals the point and it controls by itself. So you just see if the patient is stable, it's not improving, then it'll just stop by itself. But if it is so rapid, like if there's a continuous gush of blood somewhere, then of course, and the patient is not being stabilized, then of course it's in the main OT, the patient goes. We haven't seen, these are very rarely reported cases, but one should always be mindful of the iliac vessels. Before doing your pickup, go see them, be at ease to just see where they are. Just see the anatomy of the follicles, which are on the outer end of the ovary, which are next to the iliac vessels. Turn on your color, and before starting the pickup, don't be in a hurry. Just see that anatomy, switch on the color, see which are the follicles which are actually follicles and which are not. So be at ease. Once you're sure of that iliac vessel anatomy, then start your pickup.
Yeah, very useful tips, ma'am. Thank you so much. And I don't see any more questions, and it was a very informative session. Thank you so much.
It's always nice being here with all of you. Thank you.
So
Okay.
we are
So
closing
next is
now.
Next is our actual session, which we were starting.
2nd of March, we start the course.
Yes.
And I think the time will remain the same, around 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Indian Standard Time, 6 p.m.
So we will be starting with gonadotropins. All what you need to know regarding their pharmacology, how do they make a difference, and then practically how do they make a difference, what is the evidence and what is the real life use of gonadotropins, which one to use where, and we'll see if we come to certain conclusions, practical conclusions regarding it. Okay, so thank you so much. Good day to all. Thank you, Dr. Sarkar.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Good night. Good night. Thank you. Bye. Bye.